Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the Conservative National Convention, Fleur Butler.
Ladies and gentlemen, Conservative members and friends, I am Fleur Butler, the elected President of the Conservative Convention, and it gives me great pleasure that this also means I am your conference chairman for 2022. Welcome. It gives me particular satisfaction, not just because we have a new female leader of the Conservative Party, which makes 3 to Labour's 0, yes, but for a very different and personal reason. Rab Butler, my grandfather, held the position of conference chairman in 1956. So let us consider what are the changes that have taken place since Rab's day. Well, in 1956, we would not have been worried about whether it was Manchester or Birmingham, or even Blackpool or Bournemouth. The conference was held at what Pathé News calls that lovely tourist town of Llandudno in North Wales, in the Grand Hotel and conference rooms. And packing for this event would have been a greater challenge than it is for today. Rumours suggest that the conference lasted 7 days, with 3 formal black-tie dances, including the Agent's Ball. But I can find scant evidence to prove this. I am old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher dancing at the Agent's Ball, which was still taking place in the Blackpool Tower when I first went to conference. And I am sure our Prime Minister today must be thankful for small mercies that she is no longer expected to be compared to the Strictly Come Dancing competitions held there. Rab, as conference chairman in 1956, was almost single-handedly in charge of running conference, whilst holding the role of head of Conservative Research Department and leader of the House at that time. This could explain why some of the events were a bit dry that he planned to fill those 7 days, such as the debate between Desmond Donnelly, MP for Pembrokeshire, and Bernard Brain, worthy and august gentlemen as they were, MP for South East Essex. No further detail exists of the topic they were speaking on in the Radio Times, but the BBC's light programme assures you that their debate was coming straight from conference. Well, it's clear that they weren't competing for an audience looking for a free gin option or snacks when choosing which event to go to, isn't it? Luckily for our attendees, I am not in charge of the programme, although I would quite like to bring back dancing. But today we have a team of conference experts working with our Prime Minister's office who bring this year together with more fringe events and a new innovative programme on this main stage to hear our ministers speak of their plans for our country. And all this is done at late notice, with many of the same team delivering our leadership elections in August. So it is with relief that, as chairman, I can rely on the experience and professionalism of our modern party staff at CCHQ. And I would like to thank them particularly for the amazing work that they have done to get this conference together in such short time with the new team at Downing Street. Now, I hope you will all have a good time and welcome to Conference 2022.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordant.
Royal Navy's in. It's been just 3 weeks, since we lost Her Majesty the Queen. As we face new challenges without her, we would do well to keep her in our thoughts. History, after all, is experience. Remember that she became our Queen just 7 years after the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. We were a nation facing debt, hardship, rationing, and the daunting task of modernizing in the twilight of empire. It was said of the King's death that Britain had lost its balance wheel, that part of a watch which moves the hands forward, which keeps the beat, which keeps things steady. The world witnessed a young woman, pale with grief, pledge her whole life to our nation's service. Doubt and despair gave way to hope. Her pledge turned out to be a shining gift to the world. She saw us through change and challenge, constitutional crisis, conflict, COVID. And every time we battled, we had Her Majesty alongside us, advising us, guiding us, unifying us all, and reminding us of the challenges we'd faced together in her long life, many much greater than we face now. Her gift was calmness, confidence, courage. She enabled us to stay the course. And she gave us a common bond and a common goal between us all, between nations, beyond politics, for prosperity, for security, for unity, for a united kingdom. No words of mine can do justice to the depth of her devotion to us. And her passing was felt deeply in every place on earth because it reminded us of our own grief for loved ones we'd lost, because she had shared her family with us. You see, crowns are not made of precious metals and jewels alone. They are mostly made of duty and love. So when she died, we carried her on a river of love, from Balmoral to her final resting place at Windsor. Its tributaries weren't just pageantry, they were personal. There were the guards of honour from tractor drivers and horse riders. There were the crayoned drawings attached to railings and carpets of flowers and an enormous amount of cling-wrapped marmalade sandwiches. And prayers and thanks from every faith, and the ceremony of her church, the state, and her armed forces. Vigils and silences in the fading autumn light. Everyone played their part. Everyone worked together. That unity and pride and dignity are things that we will remember for the rest of our lives. It made us proud of our Queen and our country. Her final gift was to show us the truth about her remarkable reign. The revelation was in her meticulously planned final appearance. You see, our late monarch did not stamp her personality on the nation. She was the one shaped by us, by all of us, her people. The stoic, dignified, kind, patient, dutiful, queue-loving British people. That's why she was the best of us. As we mourned, we leaned on our constitution, on our traditions, and on our planning. We saw the pride, the people, causes, and organizations she cherished, and that this nation was the cradle for, many of which were represented in her funeral procession. And we saw the values that bind us, because they were embodied in her. And we calmly got on with it, cheerfully facing change and challenge. And we coped really well. An entirely new government was formed. Strike action of both the rail dispute variety and the football variety was cancelled. Supply of arms and support for Ukraine never faltered. We kept calm and we carried on, because that is what great people and great nations do. We're not measured in triumph, we are measured in challenge. And in that final journey, she brought us together again. She made us realize that duty and sacrifice and tolerance and above all love are everything to the British way of life. But most of all, we were filled with good wishes for our new king. He bears the same cross that she did, that all do that wear the crown. He will be our new balance wheel. He will be by our side in the new challenges that we face. We will face them together. We should not and we will not be daunted by them. We will remember our duty. We will continue to move things forward, to keep things steady, not to miss a beat, and to bring hope. Do not forget what she taught us. Do not forget what we must do. Do not forget who we are. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. We will be with our families again. We will meet with them.
This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Your first audience with Her Majesty the Queen is really a pretty nerve-wracking experience, because the equerry tells you all sorts of things that you've got to do, where to shake hands, how to shake hands, what to say, how to address Her Majesty, and you're kind of worried you're gonna stuff it up. But after a few moments, it becomes incredibly informal, and she's brilliant at asking questions that elicit a great torrent of stuff, and there's a lot of laughter. There certainly was with the audiences that that I had. Sadly and rightly, I can't tell you what she said or what we said, but there was a lot of laughter.
Well, of course, this was taken at my first audience, because my first audience was the one when I went to the palace and the Queen invited me to form a government. And at that moment when you walk through the door and you have that first audience, it becomes real that you are Prime Minister, you're taking on this privileged position, but also this responsibility. But Her Majesty was so good at putting everybody at their ease. And both that audience and the audiences I then went on to have with her subsequently, they were conversations. She was incredibly well informed, had immense experience, knowledge and wisdom. And it's a moment in the week when you're away from the hurly-burly of politics and you can actually sit down with somebody with experience and wisdom, knowledge and understanding and have that conversation about the issues of the day.
Well, my first audience was pretty extraordinary because, of course, we had a hung parliament. The Conservatives were much the biggest party after a great election victory in 2010. But when I went to see Her Majesty, I had to ask, I'd like to form a government, but I can't tell you exactly what sort of government it's going to be because Gordon Brown had left Downing Street and the coalition hadn't quite been put in place. So I think although she had seen Prime Ministers come and Prime Ministers go, I think this was probably the first time someone had said, I can't tell you exactly what the government's going to look like, but I will form one.
Well, the first audience was surprisingly relaxed. I expected it might be a little distant, a little difficult, but it wasn't. I was greeted at the door, I was introduced to the Queen, we sat down in 2 chairs. There was absolutely no one else present except a large ring of corgis, most of whom were well behaved, but not invariably on every occasion. And that was it. There was no private secretary, no notes. And it was just a conversation. Nothing was barred, nothing was out of court. Everything was discussed. And if the Queen wished to raise subjects, she did. If she wished to respond to what I was telling her, she certainly did. And I found it both very cathartic, very interesting, and something, frankly, that one looked forward to each week.
It was an extraordinary treat to be able to go to Balmoral every year for 6 years. And one of the best parts was when, in the evening, you'd get into Her Majesty's car, a Range Rover, and she would drive at breakneck speed up the hill and onto the moor, and there at a sort of converted bothy, an old cottage on the hill, would be the Duke of Edinburgh with a barbecue he'd built himself, barbecuing grouse for your dinner. And I'm not making this up. You sat down and Prince Philip and Her Majesty the Queen served your dinner and cleared it away and washed it up while you sat talking with the other guests. And I remember, I think it was sort of year 5, I thought, well, I now surely can help, and got up and put on the marigolds and started doing the washing up. And I remember Her Majesty saying, what on earth is the Prime Minister doing? I'd broken with the protocol, rapidly sat back down and did what I was told.
The UK hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 2018, and we were very fortunate. Her Majesty was at the opening ceremony in Buckingham Palace, and she was also willing to open up. She very kindly opened Windsor Castle up for us to have some of the part of the meeting. One of the events that I remember was we were having a meeting at Windsor Castle, we were having a lunch, we had a reception before the lunch. Nobody apart from myself and 1 or 2 officials knew that Her Majesty would be coming to that reception. She walked into that room and immediately the atmosphere changed. There was this huge sense of love and respect for her, and people wanted to talk to her, and she just had lit the room up.
I know for a fact that world leaders coveted nothing more than to be bathed in the luster of her radiance. And I remember vividly as Foreign Secretary how they would lobby me, I won't give you their names, but they would lobby me to come not on a government-to-government visit. They didn't want to meet the politicians. They wanted a state visit because they hoped for the chance to meet Her Majesty the Queen. And that was because they knew quite what she had seen and done in her life. And they knew, like Barack Obama, that she truly was one of the most remarkable world leaders, if not the most remarkable world leader that he'd ever met.
When the Queen was surrounded by other world leaders, particularly at meetings of CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, It was quite extraordinary to see how they all wished to be close to the Queen, to shake hands with the Queen, to be photographed with the Queen. She was not only the head of the Commonwealth, she was to them quite a remarkable figure. It is absolutely and completely impossible to imagine they would have reacted that way had we been a republic and had the head of our state been a president. It was the magic of the monarchy and the magic of that particular monarch that made such a remarkable reaction from people.
I think her greatest legacy is demonstrating just what a brilliant model our constitutional monarchy is. She was an extraordinary symbol of national unity. She brought the country together, but she also did so much to represent and symbolise Britain abroad. And that was really based on the fact that she was so true to her word when she was in her 20s and said, whether my life be long or short, it will be dedicated to your service. She fulfilled that in every year and every month and every week of her reign.
I think the extent to which she was a very human being was most beautifully illustrated when she sat alone in her seat at the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh. It indicated to the extent that behind the monarch, behind the pageantry, behind the majesty of the throne, there was a family, there was a human, there was a marriage. And the Queen faced exactly the same difficulties in her private life as everybody in this country can imagine in their own lives. And that particular poignant picture is one I think that will remain in my mind for the rest of my life, and I think will remain in history too.
One of the striking characteristics of Her late Majesty was her devotion to duty. She gave a selfless life of service, and she'd committed to when she was 21. At just the age of 21, she said she would devote her life, however long or short, to our service, and she did that. And in a world of, if you like, celebrity and sort of people wanting to grab the limelight, she was very humble as well. And I hope that there will be a legacy for the country of more of a sense of the importance of service and duty.
I think there has been no other monarch in our history who has seen such a phenomenal increase in the prosperity, in the opportunity, in the longevity of the British people as she has in her reign. And for that reason alone, I think that she should be recorded as Elizabeth the Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we sing the national anthem, would you join me in standing, if you can, for a minute's silence to remember Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Jake Berry, Andy Street, Ben Houchin and Catherine Bennett.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Birmingham and to the West Midlands. It's 4 years since you were all last here as conference, and it's been too long. But as the late Queen said, there was never any doubt that we would meet again. Now, a lot's happened in that 4 years, and I hope you've seen the progress around you as you came to conference. But I'm not going to gloss over it. It's been a pretty difficult time for this place, this region. Before the pandemic, we talked about the strongest economy outside London. But as the manufacturing, the exporting, the conferencing capital of the UK, it's no surprise it's been very difficult. But the good news is that with incredible resilience, teamwork, and that Brummie ingenuity, we are bouncing back. And the best evidence of that bouncing back is, of course, our wonderful Commonwealth Games this summer. Now, you must have seen the sporting excellence, but it went well beyond that. We told our story through the Games, or more precisely, through a giant, clunking, mechanical bull. And if you came to see the bull, I'm sorry, he's just resting, but he will be back, I promise. And we told our history, which hasn't always been an easy history, through our wonderful opening and closing ceremonies, where a young Pakistani woman who found sanctuary here and an ageing rock star were the real star turns. And we told our story of welcome, of diversity, of togetherness, and we told the world of our comfort with ourselves. It was a Games of new jobs, new businesses, new investment, and it was a Games that in the main was funded by our Conservative government. And I do want to say a big thank you to Theresa May, because it was her who gave us our chance. I hope we seized it and delivered for the city, the region, the country, and the Commonwealth. So what else has been going on then over those 4 years? We've been building a lot. Guess when you came here before, you stepped through the building site around you to get to conference. Now we have a beautiful city centre that could grace any European city. But it's not just right here in the city that we've been building. Across the region, we're building new homes, hitting our housing targets. We're dealing with brownfield first while protecting our green belt. And we've been connecting ourselves up across the region with new transport, new stations in Coventry and Wolverhampton, new extensions to our metro, new rapid bus routes, and if you want to go and test it, a new Boris bike scheme just outside. And we've been winning investment in those business areas of the future. Electric vehicles in Coventry, future housing and construction in Wolverhampton, and here in Birmingham, finance amongst everything else. And the biggest coup of all was probably to get Goldman Sachs to make this their second headquarters. And when you ask everyone, well, why have you come to the West Midlands? They all say the same. It's the talent that's on offer here. And yes, we do now have the best qualified workforce we've ever had. And it makes me reflect. It takes me back personally to when I was 18, perhaps in the pubs of Birmingham with my friends, thinking about our futures. And there was one assumption: we'd have to leave to get on in life. It's no longer true. Now, if you're 18, you can have the career for life that you dream of here. And back in 2019, more young Brummies wrong way round, failed the line. More young Londoners came to Birmingham than young Brummies went to London. That is levelling up in action. And of course, we've been tackling net zero. That continues to be the defining challenge of our era. So we're busy electrifying automotive, decarbonising transport, and of course, retrofitting our homes. And the most recent announcement, the first net zero neighbourhood here in Dudley. So the big question is how's all that come about? How have we made it happen? And the simple answer is about working together, about collaboration. First of all, with our brilliant Conservative team, our 14 MPs, many of the activists, the members in the room, and of course, our 3 outstanding urban councils. In Dudley, long famed for its all right Bab Living Museum, but now famed for its urban regeneration. In Walsall, leading on the critical challenge of homelessness. And in Solihull, where net zero is a way of life. All of them playing their part. And then with businesses, Severn Trent, who've delivered on the promise of the greenest games ever. And with National Grid, who've cut our bus fares so we're now lower than 2014, a big saving to everybody. And with our community and faith groups as we stand against any intolerance. So what now for the West Midlands? Well, it's very simple. We will deliver on our plan for growth, bringing new businesses, new jobs, new ideas, all born in our universities. And we will be spurred on by the Prime Minister's vision for these investment zones. You don't know it, but you have just walked through the most successful enterprise zone in Britain as you came to conference. Public and private coming together to see that regeneration. So we know the policy will work. So in conclusion, my message to conference and to government is very, very simple. Back us, back the West Midlands, back the next stage of devolution, and we will deliver, we will level up, because we know it's the right thing to do. And the Prime Minister's words encapsulate it. She said very simply, when the West Midlands succeeds, the country succeeds. That's right. We look forward to working together to do just that. Thank you. Enjoy Birmingham. And I'm very pleased now to introduce the chairman of our party, Jake Berry.
My fellow Conservatives, my friends, hello and welcome. Welcome to our conference. Welcome to this great city of Birmingham. And when I look at the audience today, I don't just see colleagues. I see friends and Conservatives from all over the country. Friends from Scotland, friends from Wales, friends from Northern Ireland, friends from the Midlands, the South, and of course the North of England too. And I want to reassure you all, even though you may think I look a bit like Mick Lynch, I'm happy to report that despite his best efforts, we are going to have a great conference here in Birmingham. Now, we know it will take more than a union baron to stop the Conservative Party delivering. Because when I look around this room, I see friends, people who went out there in the wind, in the rain, in the snow, the ice, the darkness of that 2019 December election, knocking on those doors. So we know it wasn't only CCHQ that won that election. Indeed, it wasn't only Boris Johnson, fine Conservative that he is. It was you. You won the election in 2019. You cut that swathe from Murray to Maldon, from St Ives to Scarborough. And your historic victory was driven by millions of people up and down our country who laid aside their old tribal loyalties. They didn't just vote Conservative. They voted for change. They voted for action. They voted for delivery. But my friends, you also know it would be a mistake for us to believe that 2019 general election vote was an unconditional vote for our party, the Conservative Party. And if we're going to hold those gains, in fact, if we're going to build on those gains and win the next election, we know it's time to deliver, deliver, deliver. And let me tell you, our new Prime Minister knows how to deliver. Liz Truss is a woman of action. Conference, as Margaret Thatcher told us, in politics, if you want something done, you ask a man. Sorry, if you want something said, you ask a man. If you want something done, who do you ask? You ask a woman. And of course, we know you can only level up by getting things done. We know the people who voted Conservative want to get things done. They want us to prove them right. They want to stand in their pub and tell their friends, I voted Conservative in 2019 and my town is getting better. But Conservatives also know you can only deliver levelling up by going for growth. That's why we're going to drive down tax to level up our country. But if we're going to win that historic fifth term in government, I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to take a lot of hard graft. I'm going to be meeting with you again on the doorsteps of our cities, of our towns, of our villages. In fact, all over this great country, we will show that we have repaid that vote of trust, that vote of thanks and that support for the Conservative Party by uniting and levelling up our country. Now, I know we can do it. In fact, more than that, I know you can do it. So, Conference, levelling up, it's a team game. Government can't do it on its own. It's a partnership between civic leaders and businesses. And that's why all of the Conservative councillors sat in this hall today are so important to our party. We are going to work with you all, those strong local leaders, because you are the ones who will deliver levelling up. And it's now my pleasure to introduce someone who has delivered time and time again. In fact, the embodiment of one of those Conservative-minded civic leaders who is getting on and delivering for our country. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to the stage Ben Houchin. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Conference, and thank you for that very kind and warm introduction, Jake. I'll remember to buy you a drink later on. For those of you that don't know, though, my name is Ben Houchin, and I am the representative of Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool, an incredible region in the north-east of England, and one with great heritage, pride and sense of community. If we go back to the beginning of when Middlesbrough started off, it was an incredible place. It was an Ironopolis. William Gladstone called us the infant Hercules. We were a proud centre of iron and steel, and indeed, we often say that we built the world with Teesside steel going into the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It went into the steel that protected our greatest Prime Minister during the Second World War, into the Cabinet War Rooms. Dorman Long, a Teesside steelmaker, is stamped on the beams next to the Treasury building. If we look at Darlington and Stockton, some of you will have heard that because it's the home to the world's first modern passenger railway, a form of public transport that revolutionised not just economies but countries across the world. This is a region that has delivered not just for local people, but has delivered across the globe. Now, sadly, that story does not continue as positively as it started. We have had a significant decline, and so, unfortunately, it's not an uncommon story to talk about a post-industrial decline in the north of England, with unemployment rising, with investment dropping, with more complex problems facing our local communities. It has been difficult. And when you look at the now disparaging gap between the north and the south of England, it is not dissimilar in relative terms to that between East and West Germany at the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then something significant happened. We won the 2019 election. And I put that down to three things. Actually, four things. Jake's right. Absolutely everybody within this audience. But Boris, Brexit, and levelling up. And it was the promise for levelling up our country in areas that had felt left behind for decades, under governments of both colours, that we were going to deliver for people that had felt that they had been neglected for decades. And we've started that journey. And I'm pleased to say that Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool are setting out the blueprint for what levelling up can really be. We are now booking that trend. So unfortunately in 2015, when steelmaking ended for the final time in Teesside on the 2nd of October, we are now regenerating what is now the largest brownfield site in Western Europe. We are now home to the UK's largest and first post-Brexit free port that is now home to large-scale manufacturing for the offshore wind sector. We're generating large-scale natural gas power plant projects. We're bringing large-scale carbon capture and storage facilities to the northeast. We are going to be home to large-scale hydrogen production, gigafactories, and much, much more. The reshoring of manufacturing jobs we haven't seen in this country for many, many decades. And just down the road in Darlington, the home of the first passenger railway, we also now have new Treasury building. Treasury's home away from home in Darlington, where the idea was that we're going to relocate those civil servants outside of Whitehall, recruit locally and help them understand what it's like to live in a place like Darlington and Middlesbrough, in our towns across the country that have different challenges to the major metropolitan cities of our fantastic country. And we've already seen that more than 160 Treasury officials have been recruited. Only 20% of those are relocated from London, with more than 80% being recruited from in the region. That's London, that's Treasury, and that's government speaking with a Teesside accent. And I'm proud that that's going to grow to more than 1,500 senior civil servants. That means that we're going to have a place at the top table to be able to influence better policy making for towns and villages and cities across the country outside of London. But my message to conference today is that is not enough. I'm pleased, obviously, that Teesside is blazing a trail, but if we only succeed in levelling up Teesside, we will have failed the whole of the country. And we need to make sure that if we want to form that majority that we all want to see at the next general election, we must deliver on levelling up. And time is running out. And Jake makes a fantastic point. There were people in 2019 that voted Conservative for the first time ever. There were many people in my area that voted full stop for the first time ever in 2019. And I'm a big believer that people want to be led by positivity. They want to be proven right, and they want to vote for us again, but we've got to give them that excuse. So for everybody in this hall, to the Cabinet, to ministers, to MPs, the next 2 years are going to be one hell of a fight, because whatever we do, we must start to deliver for people of this country. We must start to level up, and I hope that we can take this message from the conference today, deliver for the people of the UK, and deliver that Conservative majority at the next general election. Thank you very much.
So, two great speeches. Thank you, Andy and Ben, for that sort of rousing, rallying cry. But first, I want to talk about the role of business in Level Up, because I think everyone in the speeches mentioned the partnership between government, business and civic leaders. Do you think the voice of business is heard loud enough when we're discussing levelling up as politicians?
Thanks, Jake. I think one of the most interesting things about levelling up is the diversity across the different regions. We've just heard two great speeches from wonderful elected leaders, but in some regions, actually, a different construct is needed, and I think that's one of the great strengths we have in this country. So some of you may wonder who I am. I'm the chair of an organisation called the Western Gateway, which was set up literally just before the last general election. I'm a business person, so I was asked to chair it from a business perspective. But you're right, Jake. I feel that businesses really care passionately, and Andy knows this from his business experience, care passionately about where they operate, and they want to see it thrive, and they are keen to get involved in partnerships. So I see this at the Western Gateway. A little bit of history for you. You think about the River Severn in the Roman times. It was a centre of trade. And they also say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So we're trying to emulate the Northern Powerhouse. So obviously we had COVID, so we're not so high profile. But just a quick summary for you about who we are. So we stretch from Swansea to Cardiff on the southeast Wales side, and also from Weston-super-Mare up to Tewkesbury and Cheltenham, and then across to Swindon and different parts of Wiltshire, which is where I have the honour of living. And it's a really important economic community. Many people commute across the bridges or use the train lines across these two major conurbations, which are largely bounded in the two great cities of Bristol and Cardiff, so great economic powerhouses in themselves. And the ambition, and I have business people around the table with me, together with representatives from our local universities. We have two Russell Group universities in our area, and the spirit of partnership is strong. So we're focusing on productivity, which I know is a big part of the growth plan, really important, connectivity, and a big passion of mine is inward investment. I have a strong view that often businesses follow business. They want to know what business think about an area to invest in, how supportive is it, have we got the right workplace development, the right skills, is the infrastructure there? So that's why I spend my time caring about levelling up, and I think it's really important to get the debate out there. I heard somebody shout Southwest from the audience. From my perspective, the Western Gateway, we work very closely with the new Great Southwest and, of course, a lot of the other partnerships in our area.
Well, they keep shouting. Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you, sir. I'm going to come on to talk to Andy to ask, really interesting, thank you for that. We hear about the collaboration between business, government and civic leaders, but I think the great thing you picked up are the two Russell Group universities. How are you working with the great sort of academic institutions here in Birmingham, Andy, to drive forward your ambition?
I'm glad you've asked me that question, Jake, because you know when you're against the clock in one of these speeches, you think, who am I going to cross out? And I crossed out the universities, and there'll be people in this room saying, you missed us. But the answer is they are absolutely critical to our future. If you think, I'll give you two examples so it isn't just theory. If you think of our prowess here in the automotive industry, and as that is changed, Warwick University through the Warwick Manufacturing Group, which is part of the catapult system, they are really doing the thinking of the ideas that then gets converted by small companies and ultimately big manufacturers into the successes of the future. So critical. But then a sector that we are maybe less well known for, if you take the med tech sector, an area where we really want to grow. University of Birmingham has a fantastic medical school, arguably, and I'll get myself into debate here, the best in the country. But we haven't quite commercialised it in the past. So that's what we're trying to do now, the spin-outs of that growing and becoming the businesses of the future. And indeed, down in South Birmingham now, there is a huge development driven by Bruntwood private capital with the university, which is providing the labs where those innovations will come to market. It's almost a model like Boston in the USA. That's who we're trying to be.
Fantastic. Well, I think you may also be trying to beat Teesside University, somewhere Ben and I have visited together. Ben, tell us a bit about Teesside, which also has a real specialism in materials, which is what you and I went to see together, which is absolutely vital to drive forward the wider economy in your area.
It is, and fundamentally, if we want to level up, we need to unleash the power of business. That's what it comes down to, and Catherine's involved with the Centre for Processing Industries, CPI, based in Darlington, with strong links to the Midlands engine. And you know better than anybody, Jake, and kind of to address the gentleman's point about the Southwest as well, you know, we talk less and less about the Northern Powerhouse, don't we, than we used to, because we recognise, actually, yes, the North absolutely needs to be levelled up. We need to get rid of that wage gap. We need to make sure that GDP is relative, because if the whole of the UK succeeds, then that's better for UK PLC as a whole. But we talk less about the Northern Powerhouse and more about levelling up, because we also recognise there are other areas of the country outside of the North, just like the Southwest, that absolutely require as much levelling up as places like Teesside. And actually, there's a great comparison, because arguably two of the most deprived areas in the country are Teesside and Cornwall together, which shows that the only way to be able to bridge that gap in wages, in GDP, in investment, is through unleashing the benefits of the private sector. Now, in Teesside, we have our own specialisms. We're very much looking at things like biologics. We're doing lots around large-scale manufacturing, as I touched upon in my speech, that really we haven't done in this country for a long, long time. And there is a fantastic organisation called the Material Processing Institute, which is actually a spin-out of former British Steel, which is doing some fantastic work on things like graphene, on carbon fibre, on new ways of making steel. I mean, they're already partnering again back, strangely, with British Steel on how to green steel with electric arc furnaces, hydrogen technology, carbon capture and storage. And actually what we're finding is these industrial areas like Teesside, of which there are others in Jake's patch in the northwest as well, we're often the home of where a lot of these technologies are going to solve, for example, our decarbonisation issues and the reindustrialisation issues that we face. So absolutely, we've got a lot of fantastic institutes, but we need to make sure that we unleash that potential, and that requires really the backing of the government and no deprioritisation of the levelling up agenda, which really, like I say, next to Boris and Brexit, was the thing that delivered that incredible majority in 2019.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to pick up on something I said and you said, and the reason I said it is because I pinched it from you. Ben gave a brilliant interview. I thought, right, I'll pinch that. You talk about us having been lent votes in all parts of the United Kingdom. We saw the biggest Conservative majority for decades. But in order to retain that support, people need to feel levelling up, inaction in their area. What does it look like in the Teesside, in the southwest, and then lastly in the West Mids?
I mean, I'll speak from a Teesside point of view, and I'm sure Andy and Catherine will give their view. I mean, Teesside and large parts of the north are much further behind other parts of the country, as is demonstrated by all of the metrics. And so what levelling up means to us is very different to what it means elsewhere in the country. I mean, people talk about wanting metros, they want tube stations. London wants another £4 or £5 billion to support its public transport system. It would be quite nice to have a bus service full stop. I mean, there are parts of my community that just don't have any public transport. So just what levelling up means to places like mine is just get us to the starting line. Just let us compete. And that's different to other parts of the country. And so, we went from pre-2019 to having one Conservative MP in the region out of 8.5, if you include Sedgefield, which is half in the Tees Valley. And we now have 7 of 9. And that was on the promise of levelling up. And you'll know, Jake, because you get it as much as I do. There are people that never voted full stop before they voted for the Conservatives. There were people that voted for us who'd voted Labour their whole lives, and their parents and their parents' parents and their parents' parents, going back infinitum, had voted Labour. And it goes to that point that they did it because they finally believed that we had the same values and we had the same aspirations for them that they had for themselves. And people do want to be proven right. They want to be able to go down the pub, as you say, and say to all of their mates who didn't vote for us, I voted Conservatives, I told you I was right to do that. They want to vote for us again, but they need to be able to see and touch and feel a change. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to deliver levelling up, because levelling up is going to take 15, 20, 30 years. But you need to be able to point to better public transport, construction starting, new jobs, their children, little Johnny or little Jane, all of a sudden getting an apprenticeship. They need to feel a demonstrable change. And I'm not entirely sure that, other than Teesside, in the north of England anyway, I'm sure Andy can give some examples in the Midlands, that we've done enough across parts of the north of England where they did vote for us to give them the excuse to vote for us again.
Well, before we go to the North of England and the Midlands, Catherine, South West, South Wales, your patch?
Well, I think the key thing is that the Levelling Up white paper referred to innovation clusters, and Ben's given lots of examples, Andy has as well. And I think people want to get behind the strengths of their particular area to help them be competitive and bid for future investment. And I see that all the time. I'm asked often to go and support potential inward investors coming in and talk, as I said earlier, Jake, about the business voice. The other thing, of course, that came out from the announcement last Friday was, of course, the investment zones. And I know these are really key, and many of us are busy putting our good case on the table. And I quite like that competition. It's good. And people in the community care about it. Ever since I've been doing this role, I've been contacted by so many people from business saying, how can we help you with this bid? And that's powerful.
And Andy, I guess you're going to tell us we can see it out the window of our hotel rooms.
Yeah, well, that's what I'd like you to tell me when you finished your week here, really. But the reason I told my story about me as an 18-year-old and how I hope young people in the region would feel now is I do think levelling up is a lot more than cranes and bus stops and new metro stations. That's all part of it. And we have been lucky enough to be able to win investment to do a lot of that, and we need to continue. But actually, I think it's something much deeper, particularly for parents and youngsters, to say, actually, are there the opportunities here for me to fulfil whatever my dream is? And that's why this whole issue about skills, training, and how that links to the jobs of the future is, I think, right at the heart of it, so that young people here don't have to jump on the train to London. They can actually stay here and fulfil their aims. And we are definitely getting closer to that as the workforce gets better qualified and we bring in investment in the sectors that are going to create those jobs of the future, some of which we've just been talking about.
And we're going to give Catherine the final word on the role that particularly vocational education can play
and how you think that's integral to driving this agenda.
Thank you. Well, my day job, I'm the honour of being the CEO of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and skills and workforce development is absolutely key for that. And one of the big projects we're doing with many parts of government is foresighting, looking ahead at the skills we need in the future. Ben mentioned hydrogen. There's so many opportunities there. The net zero economy, important for all our areas, and we've got to get the right skills in place for that. So that's something my organisation is doing with Innovate UK, obviously part of Department of Business. So we've just got, and this is where we need to listen to business as well. Foresighting isn't all about academics thinking, what do we need in the future? It's also hearing from the here and now.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you can please join me in a round of applause for our wonderful panel here today in Birmingham.
Conference, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this session about Northern Ireland and getting the United Kingdom moving. It's a pleasure to be with you all here at conference, and an honour to have been appointed Secretary of State for Northern Ireland not so long ago. I and my fellow ministers have immense pride in the fact that we represent the government in such a special part of the United Kingdom. If I may, I'd like to introduce you to them. Firstly, two along, you'll know why I did that, my Minister of State, Steve Baker, who, like me in the past, Steve has been a minister in the Department for Exiting the European Union. Since then, he's campaigned on many issues and is known for his energy and knowledge of all things European. Next to me is my Lords Minister, Lord Kane. Jonathan, before becoming a Lord, and a minister, Jonathan is a former special advisor to no less than 6 former Secretaries of State for Northern Ireland. His knowledge of Northern Ireland and its political history, the issues it faces today, and its potential for the future is second to none in government and probably in the country. In the audience, there's also our Department Whip, Jacob Young. Hello, Jacob. Thank you very much indeed for keeping us in order. And our PPS, Tom Hunt. Thank you, Tom, for my first day. I had questions after 12 hours of being in the job, and Tom helped me very much prepare for those. So thank you, Tom. And our 2 special advisors, Louis Flood and Victoria Houchin. So thank you as well. We may be a small team, but we have some bold ambitions to deliver for the people of Northern Ireland, and we are ably assisted by some excellent officials in the Northern Ireland office, who I'd formally also like to thank, even though they can't be with us today because they're civil servants. Northern Ireland is facing a number of issues that need resolving, not least of which is the fixing of the Northern Ireland Protocol, restoring the power-sharing institutions at Stormont, and developing a thriving, open economy. And we're going to talk about some of those things at this point in time. But we should all remember, though, that other issues have dominated Northern Ireland's history, certainly in my lifetime. Indeed, delivering for Northern Ireland would not be possible, delivering anything for Northern Ireland would not be possible without the peace and stability brought about by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Now, many of you will recall how Northern Ireland was once a place blighted by conflict and sectarian tensions, but that has changed since the signing of the agreement. It was a defining moment for Northern Ireland and the beginning of a journey towards peaceful and prosperous future. The 25th anniversary of that signing is on the 10th of April next year. So we thought now would be quite an appropriate time to reflect on how an agreement was achieved, the progress that's been made in the last 24 and a half years since 1998, and what lies ahead as part for this part of our United Kingdom. But to kind of set the scene and give it a true, not historical context, but a contemporary context, can I hand over to you, Jonathan?
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary of State Chris, and thank you for those very kind words of introduction. I think you're absolutely right that the agreement that was reached on the 10th of April 1998 was an absolute landmark, not just in Northern Ireland, but in the history of these islands. It helped to bring an end to 3 decades of violent terrorism, which had claimed something in the region of just over 3,500 lives. When I first started working in Northern Ireland in the late 1980s and early 90s, we were experiencing around about 100, somewhere in the region of 100 deaths a year due to the security situation. Notwithstanding the current threat that we still face from a small number of dissidents, the security situation has been completely transformed. One of the other great achievements of the agreement was that it ensured that the future of Northern Ireland would only ever be decided by democracy and consent, the so-called consent principle at the heart of the agreement. And that means that so long as the people of Northern Ireland, a majority of them, wish to remain part of our United Kingdom, and I think we as Conservatives and Unionists hope that that will always be the case, then Northern Ireland's position within our union is guaranteed. The agreement itself is based upon 3 strands. The first strand, internal Northern Ireland, second strand, north-south, and the third strand, east-west, the bilateral relationship between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, or as we call it these days, just Ireland. And the beauty of the agreement has been its ability to accommodate difference within Northern Ireland and on the island of Ireland, but to enable people to work together to build a better and shared future for all the people who live there. And it's absolutely right to say that the agreement has been the bedrock of all that has been achieved in the past 24 and a half years. We all know that the agreement was reached under a Labour government in 1998, and I think it's fair to acknowledge the role that Tony Blair and his ministers played at the time. But it didn't come out of nowhere, and it was the result of many, many years of painstaking efforts and negotiations and discussions. And I remember particularly my former bosses, Peter Brook and Patrick Mayhew, and also the work that John Major did to pave the way for what happened in 1998. And I think at this conference, it's also fitting that we remember my good and dear old friend and former Conservative colleague in the House of Lords, who sadly died in July, David Trimble, Lord Trimble, for his courage, leadership, and the sacrifice that he made for the people of Northern Ireland to build a better future. My final point on this would be, we do rightly acknowledge the contribution of politicians to what happened in 1998 and subsequently, but let us never forget that without the gallant service and sacrifice of the Royal Ulster Constabulary and our armed forces, there would never have been a peace process in Northern Ireland, and we should always remember the debt that we owe those people.
And Steve, give us a flavour of the potential of Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland turns out to it's continued to have, that vibrant spirit of private sector entrepreneurship, which was long associated with Belfast. You think about the shipbuilding sector in particular. But today it's aerospace, it's software. To put it in context, I'm told software engineers are paid in Northern Ireland about the same as they're paid in London. It's an extraordinary thing because they're so good in Northern Ireland on fintech, on cryptocurrencies and on security. So there's an amazing, vibrant spirit of entrepreneurship in Northern Ireland. I've been amazed to see with the FSB and with Chambers of Commerce just how uplifting people are, how hopeful and how optimistic they are. I think when you meet a growing political centre ground in Northern Ireland, people who just want to get on with their lives and aren't too preoccupied with nationalism or unionism, those people have got an incredible spirit of get up and go, a spirit that we as Conservatives really recognise and will want to foster. So I'm really keen that we deliver investment zones. The Secretary of State has specifically tasked me to look at that. I've come up with, the department have come up with a list that we will propose, because of course it is devolved, we will propose it hopefully to new ministers if we're able to get the Assembly up. And then I very much hope we'll deliver at least 3 investment zones in Northern Ireland. I think that there's tremendous potential for Northern Ireland to be the best place in the world to invest. If there is access, as there should be, unfettered to both Great Britain in a single United Kingdom internal market and also to the European Union, then I genuinely believe that Northern Ireland can be the best place in the world to invest. And I think it will be this Conservative government which makes it so. But what we have got to do, we've got to get that executive and that Assembly back up and running. That means making progress on the protocol.
Yeah. And to try and draw these, both the history and the context that Steve's just given together, we've got a number of small dilemmas currently in the Northern Ireland context. One is that there is no functioning executive. No, the devolved Assembly hasn't sat. It sat to give its respects to the late Queen, but apart from that, hasn't been sitting since the beginning of the year. And that causes all sorts of issues for voters and people in Northern Ireland, doesn't matter what their background or community. To try and get the £400 energy payments that we've made to everybody else in the United Kingdom to individuals in Northern Ireland is so much more difficult without an executive functioning and working. The health service in Northern Ireland is not delivering. Well, if I was a constituency MP in Northern Ireland, I think my mailbag would be full of people complaining about the waiting times and other things that is going on in the health service there, and a whole host of other things that would be better managed if we had a functioning executive. To get a functioning executive, we know that we have a bigger political fish to fry, and that is trying to find some solution to the Northern Ireland Protocol, that part of our renegotiated settlement with the European Union that certainly was not written in malice, certainly wasn't written to deliver some of the obstacles it has delivered to trade, but absolutely has delivered obstacles for people. Back at the beginning of the year, when I was in another role, I spoke with Marks and Spencers, who told me about the hundreds of different products that are not available to consumers in Northern Ireland that are available to the rest of us because of what they perceive the protocol does to their business. I spoke to a whole host of different consumer groups. They all believe that the protocol might work in different ways, but just is a hindrance to so many different sectors. And it is the obstacle that is stopping the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, from going into the executive following the election. So we know, for all very good reasons, that we need to have some sort of renegotiated settlement when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I sat on a call on Friday with the Foreign Secretary and a European Commissioner, Maros Sefcovic, where these discussions reopened with gusto. And I hope, and maybe James might say something about this later in the week, but I hope that the mood music that many in Northern Ireland detect around the future of the protocol and what outcomes it might deliver will actually play its part in helping us find solutions to the issues that stop the DUP going into the executive, that allow the executive to function, that then move on public services in Northern Ireland and allow all the other elements that we need to get right for the people of Northern Ireland to be got right. So there's a lot going on before we even get to this really important anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And it's as Jonathan outlined, and I'll try and put some more meat on the bone. I might ask you to help me. But there are 3 strands to that agreement. And we are constantly involved in institutions on the north-south strand. There's different conferences and meetings with Irish politicians to keep the north-south strand working. But actually the east-west strand has been slightly overlooked over a period of time. I don't know if you'd agree with me, Jonathan.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a veteran of over 20-something visits to the US over the last decade, where I've engaged extensively with Irish America, with congressmen who've had an interest in Northern Ireland, and with the successive administrations. And I say politely that there is occasionally a tendency, shall we say, to look at the Belfast Good Friday Agreement almost exclusively through the prism of Strand 2, which is the North-South arrangements. And one of the tasks that we have is to make sure that actually people look at the agreement as a whole, all three strands. Without Strand 1, Strand 2 doesn't work. Without Strands 1 and 2, Strand 3 doesn't work properly. So we have to see the agreement implemented fully and in the round, and that includes all three strands, not just Strand 2.
Yeah, I want to just add that I think what we can see here is a real change in the attitude from everyone. I think people have really begun to realise that to respect the Good Friday Agreement does mean respecting all three strands. As a unionist said to me recently, they have seen a constitutional change without their consent through the protocol. Now, of course, others will argue that they've seen constitutional change through having left the European Union without their consent. But now's a time to really move on and accept the Belfast Good Friday Agreement as the fundamental fact which brings peace and enables government in Northern Ireland. But the thing I want to add, as one of the people who perhaps acted with the most ferocious determination to get the UK out of the EU, I think we have to bring some humility to this situation. And it's with humility that I want to accept and acknowledge that I and others did not always behave in a way which encouraged Ireland and the European Union to trust us to accept that they have legitimate interests that we're willing to respect, because they do, and we are willing to respect them. And I'm sorry about that, because relations with Ireland are not where they should be, and we all need to work extremely hard to improve them. And I know that we are doing so. Actually, the demise of Her late Majesty gave us an opportunity to meet leading Irish figures, and I said to some of them, you know, I am sorry that we did not always respect your legitimate interests. And I hope they won't mind me saying I felt I could feel the ice thawing a bit. But I should also say the counterpoint to that is resolve. No one should underestimate our resolve, this government's resolve, to get progress on the protocol. It is not acceptable that Northern Ireland is so separate from GB right now under the protocol, a protocol which at the moment is only partially implemented. So we are absolutely resolute in getting change. That change is set out in the bill that we've presented, which is going through Parliament in the House of Lords. But that combination of humility and resolve, and that willingness to build up relations and say, actually, yes, we do want to be Ireland's closest friends and partners, as we all respect all three strands of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That really is where we need to be. And I think what we're seeing, the Secretary of State more closely than me, is that the mood is shifting and people do want a negotiated solution.
Yeah, and as a former member of the European Parliament, I completely understand why our European friends want to protect their single market, but I want to protect ours too. And actually, there's a symbiotic relationship there that we should have. But of course, Northern Ireland sits in this fantastic place where I understand a bit of Northern Ireland history, but I've learnt a lot in the last few years. The fact that the common travel area allows people to determine what passport they have. The fact that actually it's got a common energy policy, or a common energy market. So what we do independently in the United Kingdom, where we give £400 and other support to consumers of energy, actually can have some effect on the market in Ireland, and has some ramifications. So I understand the complications, and maybe we could have understood them a bit better sooner. But now the mood music, it certainly is. It seems to be changing, and I very much hope that we get some solutions, because the people of Northern Ireland just want politics to move on a tiny bit. They want their assembly to work for them, and we have a very good message to sell to the world about what an amazing place Northern Ireland is and how good it could be, with dual regulation, where goods manufactured in Northern Ireland can go into the single market or can come into our single market. The investment that could bring, from people who believe they have a shared history with Ireland. 40 million Americans believe that they have Irish ancestry. And people who just want this wonderful country to succeed. So it's a bit of a conundrum, Northern Ireland. Its politics have always been interesting. It's in a much better place than it's been before because of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. But the importance of actually just having this session is just to remind everybody how important the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was. I had a curry night with a bunch of young Conservatives on Friday, and they were all fairly knowledgeable about their politics. They certainly knew who Steve Baker was, and yeah, indeed. And they'd heard of that ERG thing as well that you and I used to chair. Yes. But there was a bit of a gap in their knowledge that goes back in history that bit longer. When I said the Belfast Good Friday Agreement has brought peace and prosperity, they didn't quite get it. When I told them that it was only just over 25 years ago that the Canary Wharf was bombed by the IRA, that the motorway network stopped because there were bomb threats across the country, they didn't quite believe me. So peace and prosperity, you know, how it's brought about can be easily forgotten. So this 25th anniversary is truly important. So let's hope we can put the protocol to bed, get the assembly going, and then everybody can move forward in a peaceful and prosperous Northern Ireland. Thank you, Conference.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on securing Scotland's place in the UK. My name is Nushina Mubarak, and on our panel we have Douglas Ross, leader of the Scottish Conservatives, and we have Craig Hoy, chairman of the Scottish Conservatives. And so I think we should just kick off this discussion. Douglas and Craig, how do you think Scotland benefits from being part of the UK?
Well, we see it day in, day out, Nishina. We see the benefits of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom in good times and bad. And sadly, in recent years, there have been more difficult and challenging times. And if we just look at the COVID pandemic, for example, I know my constituents in Moray, individuals and businesses across Scotland, benefited in exactly the same way as individuals and businesses across other parts of the United Kingdom. The furlough scheme, for example, was a massive government intervention by the UK Conservative government that meant people kept their jobs in the most difficult of circumstances. It gave them the security they were looking for when times were extremely challenging. And of course, if we look at the self-employed income support, the bounce back loans, the support for businesses as well as employees, it was a massive fiscal intervention that was possible because Scotland was and is an integral part of the United Kingdom. And continuing with the pandemic, we got out of the toughest of restrictions, and sadly in Scotland at times they were tougher in Scotland than they were in other parts of the United Kingdom, but we were able to do that because of the world-leading vaccination scheme that we had. Vaccines that were procured and in some cases developed in the United Kingdom were available to people across the UK, in Scotland as well, which meant we could lift some of those tough restrictions we were living under for so long. So looking at that, awful period for the country and the world, Scotland was helped through that because of our place in the United Kingdom.
Is absolutely right. I mean, if you think about the vaccine programme, that really did illustrate the very best of British. I mean, it was the best of British science and innovation that meant we developed the vaccine. It was the very best of British trade and diplomacy that we acquired so much of the vaccine, not just for ourselves, but for the developing world as well. And it was the very, very best of British logistics that meant that we could use the 4 national health services of the United Kingdom and the British Army to roll the vaccine out. But it's not just in those exceptional times that we see the value of the Union, because if you think about it, Scots, every man, woman and child in Scotland benefits to the tune of approximately £2,200 from the Union dividend, and that is hugely, hugely important. It's something that we should stress to the SNP. We also see the levelling up funding, putting money straight into Scotland's communities, and that's vitally important. And then also we look at sort of city and growth deals that are driving growth and innovation in the Scottish economy, and that's vital too. And then even look at it is the Ministry of Defence that's helping support the Scottish shipbuilding industry. So we've seen it in exceptional times, but we also see it every single day, and that's why we should continue to show that contribution that the Union brings to each and every Scot.
And it's also what Scotland provides to that union as well. This is a two-way street. Douglas Lumsden, one of our MSPs for the North East, is in the region and sat next to David Ducat. They both represent areas that are crucial to the oil and gas industry. Not Scotland's oil and gas industry, the UK's oil and gas industry. So important just now that we maximise our potentials in terms of gas and oil in terms of this energy crisis. Look at my own area again, Murray. You know, we supply more Scotch whisky than any other part of the country. So there is an awful lot of issues and matters that Scotland contributes to the United Kingdom as well.
Thank you. Well, we heard a lot at the Labour conference last week about devolving more powers to the Scottish Parliament. What do you make of that?
Well, let's remember it was the Labour Party that set up the Scottish Parliament, and there have been, since the Scotland Act of 1997 and the Parliament re-establishing in 1999, there have been a further 2 devolutions of more power to Holyrood. And that has not, I think, in any significant way dampened the enthusiasm of people who want to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK. If Labour think the answer to the problems of the nationalists wanting to divide us all over again is simply devolve more powers, then they're wrong. They've got that completely wrong. And what we've heard from Gordon Brown is the former Labour Prime Minister, who's been tasked by Keir Starmer to come up with Labour's response to the calls of nationalists for more division and to separate Scotland, is to just devolve some extra powers. I think that is the wrong approach. What I would like to see is actually a Scottish Parliament that uses the immense powers it has right now to deliver for people across Scotland. It is one of the most powerful devolved administrations anywhere in the world. As a result of spending decisions and budget calls of this UK Conservative government, it has the largest ever block grant since 1999. Yet we, as representatives, and I see there's some Glasgow councillors in the audience as well, Thomas Kerr, our group leader there, and others, we are seeing the impact of inactivity by the SNP Scottish Government, despite the powers that they have, despite the budgets that they have, because their priorities are wrong, the people of Scotland suffer. So instead of giving more powers to Holyrood and the Scottish Parliament, I would just like to see a government in Holyrood and the Scottish Parliament actually using the powers that they have to their best and the maximum.
Indeed. Craig, do you want to add to that?
Noshina, I was a journalist at Westminster and then Holyrood when the Scottish Parliament was set up, and I passionately believe in the Scottish Parliament, and I passionately believe in devolution. But Labour, at the point when they set up the Parliament, thought that it would kill nationalism stone dead. Unfortunately, Labour then effectively left the pitch in Scottish politics, and the SNP has prospered. So I think, as Douglas says, at this point in time, to give the SNP more powers when they're not using the powers they have to full effect and good effect would be a significant mistake. And I think that's why we, as Scottish Conservatives, are those that are speaking up for the silent majority in Scotland, not the Labour Party, not the Liberal Democrats, it's us. And I think if you look at the result that Douglas got in the May 2021 Scottish parliamentary election, when we got 900,000 votes, more than ever before in the history of devolution, we maintained a record 31 seats, and that's vitally important because it shows that we as Scottish Conservatives are standing up to the SNP, whilst Labour are cozying up to the SNP, just as they did in Dumfries and Galloway. Remember, Anna Sarwar said no pacts with the Labour Party and with the SNP, and now we see in Dumfries and Galloway that the SNP and Labour are in administration. So I don't think we can trust the Labour Party on the question of the future of the union.
And, you know, I wholeheartedly agree with that. You know, for me and the Scottish Conservatives, there's a line in the sand. You know, we absolutely want to ensure that Holyrood works to its maximum, delivers for people and communities across Scotland with the potential it has as one of the most powerful devolved administrations anywhere in the world. But Labour's plans to add more and more powers is simply the wrong approach to take. And the Scottish Conservatives are saying, let's use these powers. Let's use the powers we have right now. Line in the sand, no further powers need to be devolved. We just need to get the government working properly and getting the right priorities. Be that in Craig's area in the south of Scotland, my area in the Highlands and Islands, right across the country. What we also see far too much of from this SNP Scottish Government is a real bias to the Central Belt. They used to say they were the party of rural Scotland. They certainly aren't anymore. We see a lot of promises that they made over the years. For example, the dualling of the A9 and the E96. I know you're a regular traveller on the A9 up north as well, Nishina. You know, all of these projects that were promised that are now very much under threat because Nicola Sturgeon invited the Scottish Greens into her government. So not just the infrastructure projects that might not happen as a result of that, but of course the Greens don't even believe in economic growth. So when we are seeking to grow our economy in Scotland, get productivity up, to encourage businesses to do more in Scotland, actually you have ministers sat round the cabinet table within the Scottish Government who are totally against that. So let's get the focus back on delivering for Scotland, and we can do that with the powers the Scottish Parliament has right now.
Okay. Well, obviously the elephant in the room is Sturgeon's plans to hold a second independence referendum next October. We are expecting the hearings on competency at the Supreme Court later this month. How do the Scottish Conservatives plan on stopping Nicola Sturgeon in her tracks?
Well, let's be clear. Nicola Sturgeon wants to hold a referendum to separate Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom in 12 months' time. She wants to hold that referendum in a year. At a time when we are going through a global cost of living crisis, where people and family, individuals and businesses are worried about the future, and Nicola Sturgeon's priority, the priority of her ministers and of her government, is to put Scotland through another divisive independence referendum in just the next 12 months. It's completely the wrong priority at the worst possible time. But let's also look at why she's gone to the Supreme Court. Her appointed Lord Advocate has clearly said to Nicola Sturgeon that there is not the competency within the powers of the Scottish Parliament to hold a referendum, quite clearly, because powers over constitutional matters are reserved to the UK Parliament. So Nicola Sturgeon is not simply taking her eye off the ball all over again by focusing on this issue. She's almost certainly going against the advice of her own most senior lawyer, and she is wasting time, resources, money and civil servants' input on another independence referendum when it could be and should be and must be focused on far more important issues than that.
I think that issue of the Supreme Court, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has not gone to the Supreme Court out of choice. She's gone to the Supreme Court out of desperation. And it's not just us as the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party that are saying we don't want another independence referendum. It's the Scottish people. If you look at recent opinion polls, Scottish Scots, and including SNP supporters, are saying this is not the time for another independence referendum. We're coming out of the COVID pandemic. We've got huge economic challenges as we see. And in Scotland, we've also got to rebuild our public services, because after 15 years of SNP government, they have failed on schools, hospitals, roads, railways, ferries, competitiveness, jobs, and there's a huge job for them to do. So the people's priorities are to focus on all those issues, but yet again, Nicola Sturgeon wants to drag us back to the division of the past. But I think as Scottish Conservative and Unionists, we're on the side of that silent majority in Scotland, and I think it's vitally important that we articulate the case for the union, just as we're doing today, but to make sure that everybody sees not just our commitment to the union, but the contribution the union makes to them and to their everyday lives.
And we've just got to look at these failures, because our role in Holyrood as the main opposition party is to scrutinise what the government are doing. And actually, they are failing on so many areas. Craig mentioned health. Look at A&E waiting times. They are at a record high in Scotland, the worst on record. People are waiting in A&E longer than ever before, often in terrible conditions. At First Minister's questions a couple of weeks ago, I raised the case of someone who had waited 84 hours. 84 hours in A&E, in pain, in agony, desperate for attention. And it's not the fault of our outstanding frontline staff in the NHS, the doctors and the nurses, the staff at these hospitals. It's the lack of investment and the lack of prioritisation by the SNP government on this crucial issue. They, about a year ago, came up with an NHS recovery plan, which isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's not delivering for people, because time after time we think it's got as bad as it can, and they break their own record by people waiting even longer in A&E. Another issue very close to my heart is the record drug deaths in Scotland. We have not just the highest drug deaths anywhere in the United Kingdom, but Scotland has the highest drug deaths anywhere in Europe, and that is a national shame. Nicola Sturgeon said she'd taken her eye off the ball with the issue. So she then said that she would make it her defining issue to sort this out. And since she made that speech, since she made that commitment to say addressing the record drug deaths in Scotland would be her defining issue of her government, we've had the worst number of deaths in Scotland and the second worst. The highest and the second highest number of drug deaths in Scotland since Nicola Sturgeon told people she would treat that as her top priority. Moving away, sorry, just I don't want to take up too much time to speak about the SNP's failures, but I think it is right that we do articulate that. You know, another issue that really affects my constituents in Holyrood, representing the Highlands and Islands, is the ferries. So Nicola Sturgeon, to a great fanfare, as she always does, has hailed as one of her greatest projects the delivery of 2 ferries for the island communities in Scotland. Originally budgeted at £97 million, they are now years over late, and the budget has gone through the roof. Indeed, at First Minister's question time this week, I asked her to confirm that the increase in cost might be another £80 million. So not only are taxpayers losing out by their inability to deliver these ferries on time and on budget, we now have the potential of the Scottish Government being taken to court because it looks like the entire process to award the contract was rigged. It took the BBC to get investigative journalists to trawl through the paperwork, find new paperwork that's never been available to Craig's committee that's looking at this, previous committees or the Auditor General, to find out just how appalling the whole procurement process has been. And all the while, islanders are suffering. People in the island communities have been abandoned by Nicola Sturgeon and her government. They continue to wait, yet they don't see any responsibility from anyone in government accepting that they have let these communities down. And they will continue to let these communities down if they don't get these ferries built and launched very, very soon. But it looks like we're going to see more slippage, more delays and more costs.
And I think, you know, the ferries is a major scandal in the Scottish politics at the moment, but they're not just wasting money on ferries, they're wasting £20 million preparing for another independence referendum. They're wasting tens of thousands of pounds in taking this case to the Supreme Court, probably pretty safe in the knowledge that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have those powers. But why are they doing that? They're doing that because they don't want the focus on their domestic record, because it's quite clear, as Douglas said, they are failing right across the board. And we as a team at Holyrood hold the SNP government to account. I mean, Douglas asks tough questions of the First Minister every single week. He never gets an answer, but he asks the tough questions. And that's our role, is to make sure that we hold the SNP government to account on all of these issues. But they don't want to focus on that because they're no longer a political party or a party of government. They're effectively a constant campaign group on one issue, which is independence at all costs. And it's our job to make sure that we draw attention to the strength of our arguments.
I think Nicola Sturgeon has I think she said that if she fails in her bid with the Supreme Court, that she'll use the next general election as a de facto referendum. But I guess I was going to ask what would be your response, how would you conduct your campaign, but I think there's
Well, first of all, it's not for politicians to say what a general election should be about. It's for the public to say what a general election should be about, and the public decide it's on the issues that really matter to them. And as Craig said, opinion poll after opinion poll tells us that people don't see another independence referendum to divide Scotland all over again, to attempt to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK. It is not a priority for people right now. But the Scottish Conservative response will be, as the strongest pro-UK party, telling people that we are committed to Scotland remaining an integral and important, a vital part of our union. The other apparent pro-UK parties can't say that with the same authority, only the Scottish Conservatives can. But let's make the general election, when it comes, about ideas for the future of the country across all issues, not playing Nicola Sturgeon's game, which is trying to make it all about independence, because that suits her, because it takes the focus off of her own record, which is dismal after 15 years, and Scotland deserves so much better.
Thank you. I can see the clock ticking down, so we've run out of time. I think we've heard from this session that the ties between Scotland and the rest of the UK remain strong, and that only the Scottish Conservatives are up to the task of taking on the SNP. Thank you to both Douglas and Craig for that discussion, and to all of you for staying to listen. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, conference, and welcome to the panel on Wales. I'm Joanna Swash. I'm CEO of a Welsh business, Moneypenny, growing both in the UK and in the US. And with me here today is Robert Buckland, the Secretary of State for Wales, and of course, Andrew R.T. Davies, leader of the party in Wales. Let's hear from the Secretary of State first.
Well, thank you, conference. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. And I'd like to begin by paying tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Her devotion, her dedication, and her determination to serve her people is an example that should inspire each and every one of us. She was proud to be Queen of our United Kingdom. Every day on her finger, she wore a wedding ring that was forged from Welsh gold. A physical reminder of the special place that Wales held in her heart. And for as long as her memory endures, she too will have a special place in the hearts of the people of Wales. Conference, our political opponents like to talk a lot about their values. Mr. Drakeford loves to proclaim that Labour values, an overreaching state and a managed economy, are Welsh values. Mr. Price thinks that the people of Wales value independence above all else. Well, I think that we know that they are both wrong. We know that Conservative values resonate with people across Wales and across our entire United Kingdom. Let me tell you about what sets us apart. We Conservatives understand that Wales isn't the isolated, inward-looking land that the separatists seem to want. It's the beating heart of our proud union. And we know that the people of Wales share the values that define our United Kingdom. They are aspirational, enterprising, and working hard to build a brighter future for their children. And I can tell you that being a proud unionist doesn't make anyone less Welsh. And being proudly Welsh doesn't make anyone less of a unionist. The two go hand in hand. We are all part of one United Kingdom with shared values, and we are stronger together. Conference, in the Senedd, Labour have gleefully jumped into bed with Plaid Cymru, a party more focused on stoking division and ripping apart our union than delivering for Wales. And rather than focusing on the people's priorities, like delivering the M4 relief road that Welsh businesses and families are crying out for, this dysfunctional duo are hell-bent on creating a larger Senedd, packed with even more politicians paid out of the public purse. More politicians? If that's the answer, then, Conference, I have to ask, what on earth was the question? Their plans are expensive, out of touch, and designed to fan the flames of separatism. But, Conference, unlike Labour and Plaid, we, the Conservative and Unionist Party, don't believe in the politics of place. We believe in the politics of people. Instead of having to elect more and more politicians, we know that what the people of Wales want is to be able to start their own businesses, to own their own homes, and to see their communities flourish. We know that they share precisely the same dreams as people right across our union. And we know that pro-growth, pro-business policies can create a better tomorrow for Wales. Lower personal taxes will allow the people of Wales to spend more of their money in Wales. And lower taxes on businesses will allow Welsh companies to invest more of their profits in Wales. And our free ports and our investment zones will attract the businesses, the technology, and the jobs of the future to Wales. We also understand what the people of Wales want from the United Kingdom government. A hand up, not a handout. In 2019, faced down by a conservatism that was committed to levelling up communities right across our great union, Corbyn's Labour lost votes and lost seats in Wales. As Wales elected 14 Conservative MPs, the highest number in more than 30 years. Now, this blue tide has long been rising. And as this Conservative government delivers our plan to galvanise growth, I believe that it will rise higher and higher across Wales. Conference, our national programme will kickstart growth, but it must be reinforced by giving communities across Wales the tools that they need to harness it. And that's why our almost £600 million shared prosperity fund is delivering for communities in Wales. This money will be invested by local leaders who know their communities inside out. And what's more, we're using our freedom outside of the EU to bring a free port to Wales for the very first time. Backed by millions of pounds of United Kingdom government funding, a free port will bring renewed growth to Welsh communities. And it's why we're helping families and firms directly with the energy price guarantee, so that no one will go cold this winter. This is what taking back control can deliver for Wales. It means that we can show the world the fantastic goods and services that only Wales has to offer, from the most advanced aircraft wings to the most delicious lamb. And Conference, I want to finish by saying to those who might be losing faith, not just in Wales but across the country, that this Conservative government will deliver the growth and the prosperity that is only possible in a strong United Kingdom. Because we're not just neighbours, we are family with ties that bind, and we are one nation. and conference, it is only the Conservative Party that can deliver this vision for a more dynamic, more prosperous and more connected United Kingdom. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
So thank you very much for that. Let's talk about how business and government can work together for the benefit of all our communities. So how do you think that, whether it's devolved nations, UK government and the business community can work together so that we can almost create this better Wales for everybody?
Well, it's creating that relationship that stands the test of time. And what we've seen time and time again emanating from Cardiff Bay is the constant battle to say Westminster bad, Cardiff good. That's no good to man or beast, that isn't. What we need is cooperation with both governments working for the benefit of the people of Wales. Wales is as entrepreneurial as any part of the United Kingdom. But what we do see time and time again is instead of putting businesses and business opportunities first, people want to get into the trenches and have those political battles. And the one big political battle that we're having in Cardiff Bay at the moment is the tourism tax, where the Welsh Government think it's sensible to tax one of our most successful industries, the tourist industry, and make it even less competitive to other parts of the United Kingdom. 1 in 7 jobs in Wales depends on the tourism industry. We know what a great success story it's been, but what do Labour and their Plaid Cymru colleagues want to do? Slap a tax on it.
It's about working together, isn't it, Robert?
Well, it is, and I want to pay tribute to Andrew and our brilliant members of the Senedd and the Conservative group. It was a delight to be down with you last week. We worked together as a united team. Why? Because we are focused upon outcomes for the people of Wales. Now, Joanna, you run a fantastically successful business in North Wales. I know that you are very outcomes driven. I believe that there are businesses and households right across our country who want politicians to deliver. They don't want the squabbles, as Andrew quite rightly says. They want us to be grown up and constructive. That's what they'll get from a Conservative government. That's what they'll get from Conservative leadership in the Senedd. It's time for the Labour Party, who, let's face it, have had long enough in terms of government control in Cardiff, to step up to the plate.
It's almost transcending those the parties, isn't it, and actually taking it back to the grassroots and working together.
Well, entirely right. I think you, from your perspective, really get it, and I think that people in Wales get it as well.
Let's talk about investment zones. So we're based in Wrexham, and there's been significant investment really into our football club, for example, and we've seen that celebrity cash coming in. And the difference it's made to the town is palpable. There's a huge sense of pride. And that almost, for me, means that we can get that kind of community feeling, can't we, about being an investment zone and being somewhere that people could be proud of, investing in their local communities. How do towns and cities across Wales start to become a real player in the investment zone debate?
Well, I think it builds on what we talked about in our opening remarks about the relationship between, obviously, the Westminster Government and the Welsh Government. I can see in the front row Virginia there, I can see Sarah there as well, from Wrexham and Ynysmore respectively. Obviously, with Wilver and the proposals around Wilver, the free ports that we're talking about as well, coming by joint working, in fairness, to both governments. And equally, when it comes to MOD spend in Wales, because Sarah's recently just been made a minister in the Ministry of Defence, which is an excellent route into Ministry of Defence for the footprint of the military in Wales. Wales, which has traditionally provided more service personnel than its population, 8-9% of staffing in the MOD comes from Wales. It's about building those strong relationships so that instead of just saying, because that's a Westminster initiative, such as investment zones, we're not going to touch them. They are going to be the vehicle to bring that investment into deprived areas that obviously haven't had the traditional investment that maybe the M4 corridors enjoyed over the years, and building on that strong platform of the initiatives that the Westminster Government will be bringing forward.
How do you think businesses themselves can actually play their part and help drive that need for investment zones?
I think it's essential. If we're going to do this, we've got to do it with business and with communities, not for or to communities. And, Wrexham, it's great to see Wrexham becoming a city. It's really establishing not just its historic role, with its great football club and all the history that we know about Wrexham. It's forging a new future. And I think that's exciting. And I think the investment zone concept really helps harness that concept of ambition. And I will be more than happy to work with the Welsh Government to make sure that we can deliver this. The free ports model actually has been a pretty good prototype. We've developed a prospectus which is now out there, and the process has carried on right through the summer and will come to fruition in the next few months. We've got a model that works. As Andrew says, it's now up to the Welsh Government to work with the UK Government and, of course, local authorities as well in Wales, which we're working with directly in order to deliver the sort of success that our communities, particularly our left-behind communities, are looking to us to achieve.
Talking about football for a moment, you know, Wales back in the World Cup as well, so for the first time in how long?
Well, 64 years, 1958. I'm too young to remember it, but let us hope that we go beyond the quarterfinals, where I think it was Pele who stopped us last time. So let's see what happens in November.
Good football knowledge there. So, you know, it's all part of the levelling up conversation to me, isn't it? Investment zones, communities working together, businesses kind of leaning into that in the environment. What are the latest conversations in Wales on levelling up?
Well, talking about levelling up and taking it into the field of health, if I may, on this point of the conversation, you know, if people have an ailment that they can't get treated, that is an obstacle to them reaching their full potential, and it stops them being economically active. If you take North Wales, from where you're from, Joanna, 168 people are waiting for an operation. That's nearly 25% of the population of North Wales are on a waiting list. 1 in 4 people are waiting longer than 12 months for a waiting list procedure anywhere in Wales. These are huge numbers. And ultimately, unless the Welsh Government gets on top of these waiting lists and actually has a recruitment and retention plan for the NHS, as we've seen this week, we can talk all we want about economic opportunity, but there are many people's lives which are permanently now blighted by making little or no progress on those NHS waiting lists that are the worst of any part of the United Kingdom. And that's where the torch of scrutiny and tension needs to be put onto the Welsh Government, because they have complete responsibility, from executive responsibility to financial and legislative powers, to deal with the NHS in Wales. And the only thing they're dealing is a pretty rum deal to the people of Wales.
Andrew is absolutely right to link well-being and health with levelling up. Levelling up is about people. Buildings and infrastructure are very important, but it's the people that we want to encourage and develop. And yet people will not fulfil their potential if they're not getting the health services that they clearly deserve. And he's right, and his team are right to highlight Labour's failure in that respect. The conversations on levelling up go on. The Shared Prosperity Fund, which I mentioned in my speech, £600 million coming into Welsh communities. We're working already with local government and other agencies to help deliver that. And we as a UK government are absolutely committed to all parts of our United Kingdom, because, as I said, Wales is more than a nation, it's a family, and there are wider links right across the borders that are so important to many of us who live and work and share our lives with our friends right across our union. And I think, you know, the levelling up mission is all about celebrating those ties that bind and making sure that our great United Kingdom moves forward as one.
And so many of our communities are actually just across the border, aren't they? You know, it doesn't really matter whether you're in Wales or England. Sometimes we just need to make life work.
Well, people are people. And, you know, the great quality of being Welsh is that we've always been outward looking. I don't know what you think, Andrew.
It is. I mean, at the end of the day, you travel any part of Wales, and the way people commute on a daily basis for work, for leisure, for pleasure. Let's not forget, Wales, I would suggest, is the most entrepreneurial part of the United Kingdom. We have as much ambition as any part of the United Kingdom. What we have is a government that is moribund of ideas and moribund about supporting business in Wales. And as I said in my opening remarks, their answer to supporting business is to slap a tourism tax on one of the most successful parts of the business enterprise zones that we have across the length and breadth of Wales. And if you want to speak to any operator who will tell you the consequences of their actions, speak to Ashford Price in Danerogo Show Caves, the national show caves of Wales, who's actually banned Mark Drakeford from visiting.
Soundbite in the last 30 seconds. If you had a blank sheet of paper, what would you do differently in Wales?
Well, say we're open for business and ultimately be business friendly, build that skill base that we need for young people coming through, make sure the rules and regulations are business friendly. Because one thing as we go further into the 21st century, if we want world-class services, we need world-class businesses.
Fantastic. Thank you. Robert?
Andrew's absolutely right, and in our plan for growth, that is precisely what we want to see in Wales and across the UK. Gigabit broadband would be my big push. I think it's vital if we're going to have connectivity for our United Kingdom. We need connectivity for the communities across Wales.
Thank you both so much. Andrew R.T. Davies, Robert Buckland, Secretary of State for Wales and Conference. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace.
Good evening, Conference. I'm delighted to be here today in Birmingham. It's been great to come back to here since 2018. It's been even nicer to have a musical accompaniment from the people outside who think we should gather today with a theme tune. The amazing thing about Birmingham is it's Britain's one of its great cities and an outstanding example of the rich fabric that makes up our country. You know, too often politicians and journalists think the world starts and stops in London. Andy Street and his excellent team here in Birmingham demonstrate quite the opposite. And as a Lancashire MP, I'm truly grateful for the work started by Boris Johnson to level up this country. I know that our new Prime Minister is equally dedicated to continue that mission. But as we gather today for the start of our conference, I want to start by first of all paying tribute to the late Queen. The motto of the Royal Academy Sandhurst is serve to lead. In it lies the key to understanding that to be a leader, you must put your soldiers' needs before yourself. You must be selfless. Our late Queen was the very embodiment of that motto. She put her subjects before herself. She put her duty to them before her own needs. The men and women of the armed forces knew that and were inspired by that. To know that they had a commander-in-chief who was truly focused on their well-being and their interests while expecting the highest of standards from them was genuinely inspirational to all those who served. We will all miss her greatly. In these anxious and global unstable times, fanned by the polarising flames of social media, we all need some constant reassurance in our lives. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was that constant. Another constant is the men and women of our armed forces. They have been with us through all our troubles, most recently through COVID, through the evacuation from Afghanistan, through the invasion of Ukraine, and again, just a few weeks ago, on parade to say goodbye to the Commander-in-Chief. They always display the finest qualities and dedication to duty. Day in, day out, they defend us and our allies. When I took the reins at the Ministry of Defence in 2019, I undertook to reform defence to ensure that our forces had what they needed to do the task given to them by government. But I also grew on my own experience to once and for all put a stop to the hollowing out of our forces. For decades, Prime Ministers had wanted more, but Chancellors had wanted less. But inside struggled with ammunition stocks, kit maintenance, ship availability, and low living standards. In short, I was determined that whatever funding we got, we spent it making sure that it could deliver a ready, deployable force, well-equipped, well-armed, and well-trained. With any new funding, the priority would not be shiny new toys, but fixing what we had first. Only then could we embark on funding to invest for the new and modernisation. So I put the challenge of being a threat-led and modern armed forces at the heart of a 2020 Defence Command Paper. Boris Johnson shared that view and handed us the biggest settlement since the Cold War. He recognised that we needed to invest in our armed forces and not to manage decline. And Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, has gone even further and done what will be needed to finish the job. When she was Foreign Secretary, she knew what the threats were out there and she knew the influence that Britain's armed forces delivered around the world. But she also knew that defence can't live on historical reputation alone. It needed real investment for the first time, a government that would move it up their priority list. The Prime Minister's pledge to invest 3% of GDP by 2030 is what we needed to keep this country and our allies safe. Liz Truss knows that it's not a discretionary choice, but a necessity. The instability and insecurity we see around the world will not go away by itself. On Friday, President Putin illegally annexed part of Ukraine, another European state. To accompany this occasion, he delivered another tirade at the world. He did this at his very moment his own poorly equipped troops, appallingly led, were being routed from the east of Ukraine. As countries around the world condemned his actions, he attended a concert cheered on by bussed-in crowds. Ridiculous as his homophobic, anti-West rants were, what he didn't say was just as interesting. He never addressed the tens of thousands of Russian widows and mothers whose young men were sent to their deaths by incompetent generals and because of his illegal invasion. Or more than the 50,000 injured personnel he is frightened to visit. He didn't address the charges of war crimes his forces have been involved in. Because for President Putin, there is no going back. His intentions are clear. He will not stop in Ukraine. He will push west. His own essays say as much. He genuinely believes in some czarist imperialist destiny to unite the supposedly ancient people of Rus. By all the means at his disposal, he seeks to pursue ethnic nationalism in a way we haven't seen since the 1940s. Be under no illusion, he is dangerous. Ukraine says they are fighting not just for themselves, but also for us. And they're right. It is why we must stand strong beside them. It is why we must not let brutality and disregard for human rights triumph over the values of all we hold dear. And our response matters, because the world is watching. The question some will be asking is, does the international community have the determination, the unity, and the resilience to stand up for each other and for the rule of law? Well, to date, the answer is a clear and a resounding yes. In February this year, the day after Russia's invasion, I held the first international donor conference on Ukraine to coordinate military aid. We had 25 countries in attendance from across Europe, and that rapidly grew to 35. And the aid to Ukraine is not shrinking, it is growing. Last week, I visited Ukraine again to see what more we can do. Despite the attacks, they are strong and they are winning. I'm proud to say that the British weapons, like the NLAWs, are helping to make a real difference. But as well as British hardware, we are helping with our training as well. We committed to training 10,000 Ukrainian troops this year, and we are supported by Danes, Finns, Swedes, Norwegians, Dutch, Canadians, Estonians, Lithuanians, and New Zealanders, all here delivering for this challenge. And I'm pleased to say that we are committed to training next year a further 20 or 30,000 troops as required. President Putin must see the folly of his invasion. His army is broken, his international reputation is shattered, and Russia's standing in the world is lesser than it was. His errors are strategic. Instead of discouraging NATO, he's pushed Sweden and Finland to join it. No one made them, but seeing Russia's behaviour change the long-standing positions of two countries who for decades were wedded to neutrality. I'm delighted they're now joining NATO, but how unnecessary his invasion has been, and at a cost of huge suffering to all in Ukraine and wider. But Putin's reactions are wider than just Ukraine. His reach goes further. This week, we saw the mysterious damage inflicted to the Nord Stream pipelines. And it should remind us of all how fragile our economy and infrastructure is to such hybrid attacks. Our intent is to protect them. Our internet and energy are highly reliant on pipelines and cables. Russia makes no secret of its ability to target such infrastructure. So for that reason, I can announce we have recently committed to 2 specialist ships with the capability to keep our cables and pipelines safe. The first multi-role survey ship for seabed warfare will be purchased by the end of this year, fitted out here in the UK and in operation before the end of next year. The second ship will be built in the UK, and we will plan to make sure it covers all our vulnerabilities. We have no time to lose. The Prime Minister is determined to invest in defence, stand up to Russia, stand by Ukraine, and prepare us to face the threats for tomorrow. The reality is we can't afford not to invest 3% of GDP in defence, and our Prime Minister understands that. To do so would imperil our security and risk having armed forces out of step with their peers and, more worryingly, out of step with our enemies. Conference, I know times are tough, up and down Britain. People are struggling with the effects of global inflation and rising interest rates. Sadly, we're not alone in this. Across Europe and the G7, the cost of living is going up and up. And service personnel are no different. That's why this year I've rolled out free wraparound childcare for all in the forces. It is why I've frozen the daily food charge for our personnel and capped rent increases at 1% for service families. If we don't look after the people in our armed forces, the most important equipment of all, then what is the point of having our armed forces? As well as helping with the cost of living, the Ministry of Defence is one of the key drivers of economic growth across the UK. We support 219,000 private sector jobs with more than £20 billion of investment in equipment and support every year. Here in the Midlands, in Telford, we're making the new Challenger 3 turrets and Boxer armoured vehicles. And in all, defence spending contributes to over 400,000 jobs in this country right across the Union. We're building ships in Scotland, manufacturing armoured vehicles in Wales, and assembling the now world-famous N-Law anti-tank missiles in Northern Ireland, bringing new jobs, investment and opportunities to every part of the United Kingdom. There is more to do. Conference, for those who think that the solution is to turn to Labour, however, I would say that now is not the time to deploy Captain Mannering and his platoon to help with our nation's defence. You can see the Labour Party now, Captain Keir Mannering marching around his bunker in Islington, with Sergeant Blair Wilson whispering in his ear and Private Corbin Godfrey telling us how doomed we all are. But you know, Mr. Starmer, investing in defence and supporting our troops requires a lot more than waving a Union Jack. You have to actually fund them. You have to actually recognise that as the threat changes, so must the investment. In the world we live in today, there's no place for Labour's Home Guard amateurs. So, Mr. Starmer, will you match the Prime Minister's pledge of 3% of GDP by 2030? Will you put your money where your mouth is? And before I end, I want to pay tribute to my team at Defence. I've been incredibly lucky as Secretary of State to have had such excellent ministers. I want to thank Jeremy Quinn, Leo Doherty and Suzanne Webb for the work they have done. And I'm sorry to see Johnny Mercer leave the government. But I also want to welcome Sarah Atherton and Alex Shelbrooke to their posts. They will do an outstanding job. Our PPS, Ian Levy, Mark Eastwood are also key and are valued contributors to the team, for that is what it is, a team in defence. It's a conference, whatever the world may throw at us in the next few years, and no one says it's going to be easy, you can be sure that this team, alongside the UK's armed forces, will be working day and night across the globe to defend us and keep our allies safe. Thank you very much.